Welcome back guys to another Zero DTE video, and today Ernie's going to be talking about futures contracts, so make sure you stay tuned. If you're interested in becoming a pro trader, check out the link in the description where you can find Ernie's education platform. Enjoy guys.
This is showing the cycle of futures contracts for the next ES contract that becomes the front contract. And you'll see that the price differential, this is basically plotting the ES minus the SPX. So when a new front contract appears on the ES, that's the futures to the S&P, it has a premium over that S&P because it's very far out. So it's thinking, oh, the price is going to be this high or this much higher than the current price. But as you get closer and closer to the actual price, it's approaching zero or parity because now its expectation is more tempered because it's closer. So it can see it's not being wild and grandiose in its prediction, and there's less volatility that can enter into the equation because there's less time. So therefore the price starts diminishing down to parity with the SPX until it gets to zero. And that's exactly what happened here. Got to zero, here got to zero, and if you go all the way back forever and ever, that's what it looks like. In June, or this month, the current ESM 24 contract will expire. I think it's on the third Thursday, but we can see how many days it has until that happens. 18 days from now. On that day, or just before that day, probably 2 days before it, maybe 3. The new contract, which is already in play right now, which is the September expiring contract, will become the new front contract. And this chart is following just the continuous contract, which is constantly rolling to the front contract. So when the front contract becomes viable, in other words, all the volume switches over to it, it switches over. That's why we have this kind of wave action. This here was the March contract. This is the June contract. This one way back here was the December contract. Got to the end of December, flipped over to the March contract. March played itself out, flipped over to the June contract. Next contract is the September contract. That's how the futures work. But of course, there's multiple contracts running at the same time for each one of these asset types. So you have the ES. We have a June contract using the month code M. Of course, that's completely intuitive. And then U for September, because everyone knows that U stands for September, and Z for December. And it starts all over for March at H, and then again for June. All of these contracts are currently running. And then you can, if you come over here to the volume, you'll see how much volume is actually in there. You could create volume in next year's March or June contract if you could find somebody else to party with you. You can see the June contract has most of the volume, and then the September contract a much smaller amount. But as we get closer and closer, those 18 days tick down, these two numbers will start getting closer and closer to each other until the September contract overtakes the June contract. At that point, most traders will then switch to the September contract. That will be what's termed as a rollover event for futures. Now, everybody has a different notion of when to roll over. TradingView tends to roll over much earlier than most others. Now, we don't roll over because we're trading the current contract right to its very end, mostly because it's the only one that gives us a zero DTE option. So we have to trade it right to the end. We just have to be cognizant of when the very last day of that contract is so that we're specifying the right contract the next day or even the day before, because sometimes a platform can on its own switch out what it considers now the front contract from the current. You have to be careful of that sometimes. In our case, it will never happen because we're using time warp now, sometimes going 1 or 2 days out. But if you're doing 0 days out, you should never be confused by that.
Thanks for watching guys, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, make sure you hit that subscribe button and hit the like button below. If there's any questions that you might have for Coach Ernie, make sure you leave them in the comment section. Thanks guys.